The blood-red sunset painted the Montana horizon as Cassidy Matthews clutched her infant daughter closer to her chest, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. The stagecoach had left her at this desolate outpost 3 hours ago, and now night was falling with nowhere for them to go. Her husband's letter had promised a new life, but instead of finding him waiting as planned, she'd found only a dusty, half-empty town and the devastating news of his death in a mining accident just 2 weeks prior. The year was 1878, and Cassidy had traveled all the way from Boston with little more than the clothes on her back, a small trunk of possessions, and 4-month-old Emma. The mining company representative had been polite but firm there would be no widow's pension, no company housing, no assistance of any kind. Her husband James had only worked for them a month before the tunnel collapse. "Hush now, Emma," she whispered, rocking gently on the rough-hewn bench outside the general store. "We'll figure something out." But her voice trembled with uncertainty. Her last coins had been spent on a meager supper at the town's only eating establishment, and now darkness was closing in. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. A tall man on horseback emerged from the gathering dusk, his silhouette imposing against the fading light. As he drew closer, Cassidy could make out a weather-beaten face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, strong shoulders, and the unmistakable attire of a working cowboy worn leather chaps, a dusty shirt, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. He dismounted with fluid grace that belied his large frame, tying his horse to the hitching post before turning toward the store. That's when he noticed her sitting there, clutching her baby in the growing cold. He stopped, taking in the sight of her and the small trunk beside her. His blue eyes, surprisingly gentle in his sun-weathered face, met hers with a question. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Waiting for someone?" Cassidy swallowed hard. "No. Not anymore." The cowboy's gaze traveled from her face to the baby and back again. His expression softened further. "You need a place to stay tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. "We'll manage," she replied, though she had no idea how. He stood there a moment longer, considering, then made a decision. "Name's Preston Reed. I work the Cross T Ranch about 5 miles west. Not much, but it's a roof and walls." "I couldn't possibly," Cassidy began. "Mrs. Coulson at the ranch is a good woman. She'd never forgive me if I left a mother and child out here with night coming on." He paused, then added softly, looking at Emma sleeping in her arms, "That's a family if you'll have me. Help you, that is. Just for tonight." There was something in his steady gaze that made Cassidy believe him, an honesty that seemed as natural to him as breathing. With few options and the temperature dropping, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm Cassidy Matthews. This is Emma." Within minutes, Preston had secured her trunk to his saddle and helped her mount his horse. With expert care, he handed Emma back to her once she was settled, then took the reins and began leading them away from town, walking beside the horse with long, measured strides. "The ranch isn't far," he said, glancing up at her. "Mrs. Coulson will have dinner waiting." As they left the small outpost behind, Cassidy felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. She was following a stranger into the unknown Montana wilderness, yet somehow she felt safer than she had all day. "I came to meet my husband," she said suddenly, needing to explain herself. "James Matthews. He wrote that he'd found work at the Silver Creek mine and that we should join him." Her voice caught. "But when I arrived today, they told me there was an accident 2 weeks ago." Preston stopped walking for a moment, his face grave in the deepening twilight. "I heard about that cave-in. I'm sorry, Mrs. Matthews." "Please call me Cassidy," she said. "It seems Mrs. Matthews barely had time to become real before it wasn't true anymore." They continued in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather, the soft thud of the horse's hooves, and the occasional cry of a night bird. The vast Montana sky had deepened to indigo, stars beginning to prick through the darkening canopy above. "Do you have family back east?" Preston finally asked. Cassidy shook her head. "My parents died 3 years ago. It was just James and me, and now." She looked down at Emma. "Just us." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The West can be hard on those alone," he said. "But it can also offer new beginnings." The lights of the ranch house appeared in the distance, a warm glow cutting through the darkness. As they approached, Cassidy could make out a modest but well-maintained structure with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. A stout woman with gray-streaked hair appeared in the doorway, hands on her hips. "Preston Reed, I was about to send the boys out looking for you. Dinner's getting—" She stopped abruptly when she noticed Cassidy and the baby. "Well now, who do we have here?" "Mrs. Coulson, this is Cassidy Matthews and her daughter Emma," Preston explained. "They need a place for the night. Mrs. Matthews' husband was killed in the Silver Creek Cave-In." The older woman's face immediately softened with compassion. "Lord have mercy, child. Come in right this minute." Preston helped Cassidy dismount, careful not to disturb the now sleeping Emma. As they stepped onto the porch, Cassidy looked up at him. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. "It's what neighbors do out here," he replied, but something in his gaze suggested that perhaps it was more than mere obligation or kindness to a stranger. That night, settled in a small but clean room with Emma sleeping in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer, Cassidy stared at the ceiling and wondered what the morning would bring. She had no money, no prospects, and nowhere to go. But for the first time since receiving the devastating news about James, she allowed herself to feel a tiny flicker of hope. Perhaps there was a place for them here in this wild, beautiful country after all. Dawn broke early across the Montana Territory, sunlight streaming through the simple muslin curtains of Cassidy's room. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back: the stagecoach, the terrible news, and the kindness of the cowboy who had brought her to this sanctuary. Emma stirred in her drawer cradle, making the soft cooing sounds that signaled she would soon be fully awake and hungry. Cassidy rose quickly, splashing water on her face from the basin provided and pinning her hair into a simple knot. She had just finished nursing Emma when a soft knock sounded at the door. "Breakfast's ready, dear," called Mrs. Coulson's voice. "Take your time." The ranch house kitchen was warm and welcoming, with a large wood stove dominating one wall and a sturdy table at its center. Mrs. Coulson bustled about, setting plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before 3 ranch hands who tipped their hats respectfully as Cassidy entered. Preston was nowhere to be seen. "Come sit, Mrs. Matthews," Mrs. Coulson said, pulling out a chair. "You need to keep up your strength, especially if you're feeding that little one." Cassidy settled Emma in the crook of her arm and sat gratefully. "Please call me Cassidy, and thank you for your hospitality." "Shaw," the older woman said, waving away the thanks. "We look after our own out here." "But I'm not." "You're here now, aren't you?" Mrs. Coulson interrupted, her kind eyes brooking no argument. She placed a heaping plate before Cassidy. "Eat up. We can talk about what comes next after you've had some nourishment." The food was simple but delicious, and Cassidy realized how hungry she truly was. As she ate, the ranch hands finished their meals and headed out with nods of farewell, leaving her alone with Mrs. Coulson. "Preston told me your situation," the older woman said, sitting across from her with a cup of coffee. "It's a hard thing, coming all this way only to find yourself alone." Cassidy nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. "I have no family, very little money, and nowhere to go." Mrs. Coulson studied her thoughtfully. Do you have any skills? Besides being a mother, which is skill enough, mind you. I worked as a seamstress in Boston, Cassidy replied, and I've kept books for my father's small business before he passed. A smile spread across Mrs. Colson's face. Is that so? Well now, that's providential. The town's been without a proper seamstress since old Mrs. Wilkins went back east to live with her daughter last spring. And I happen to know that Mr. Peterson at the Mercantile has been looking for someone with a head for figures. Hope flickered in Cassidy's chest. Do you think he might hire me? I don't see why not. Preston's riding into town this morning. He can speak to Peterson on your behalf, and we can see about finding you a place to stay. I couldn't impose further nonsense. Mrs. Colson interrupted firmly. Preston would have it no other way, and neither would I. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the door opened and Preston stepped inside. He'd clearly been up for hours, his shirt already bearing the dust of morning work. His eyes found Cassidy immediately, something warming in their blue depths. Mrs. Matthews, he said, nodding. Did you sleep well? Yes, thank you. And please, it's Cassidy. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Cassidy, then? Mrs. Colson watched this exchange with interest before clearing her throat. Preston, I was just telling Cassidy that you might speak to Mr. Peterson about work. She has experience keeping books. Preston nodded. I'd be happy to. I'm heading into town shortly. Cassidy looked between them, overwhelmed by their willingness to help. I don't know how to thank you both. No need, Preston said simply. We help each other out here. It's how we survive. Mrs. Colson rose to pour him coffee. There's also the matter of finding a place for them to stay. Preston accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. What about the Miller cabin? He suggested. It's been empty since they moved to Oregon last fall. It's small but sound. That's a fine idea, Mrs. Colson agreed. It's just on the edge of town. Close enough for work, but with a bit of land for a garden. Cassidy looked down at Emma, now contentedly sleeping after her breakfast. A surge of determination rose within her. She would make a life for them here, somehow. How much would the rent be? She asked practically. Preston and Mrs. Colson exchanged glances. The town council owns it now, Preston explained. I serve on the council. I believe we could arrange a fair arrangement. Within the hour, Preston had saddled his horse and prepared to ride into town. This time, he had arranged for Cassidy and Emma to follow later in the small wagon with one of the ranch hands, giving her time to gather herself and prepare for the day. As he was about to leave, Cassidy stepped onto the porch, Emma in her arms. Mr. Reed Preston, she called. I just wanted to say, thank you again. Not many would stop for a stranger as you did. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Sometimes a man just knows when something's important, he said quietly. Then, with a tip of his hat, he turned his horse and rode away. Later that morning, Cassidy found herself in the small but sturdy Miller cabin on the outskirts of Silver Creek. The ranch hand who had driven her had helped bring in her trunk and a few supplies Mrs. Colson had insisted on sending along. Now, alone with Emma, Cassidy surveyed what might become their home. The cabin consisted of one main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. The furnishings were sparse but serviceable: a table and chairs, a bed frame with a straw tick mattress, a rocking chair by the hearth. It was humble, but it was clean and solid. A knock at the door startled her from her assessment. She opened it to find Preston standing there, his tall frame nearly filling the doorway. Mr. Peterson would like to meet you, he said. If you're willing, he's at the store now. Cassidy hesitated, looking down at Emma. I can't leave her. Mrs. Colson suggested you might need help with that. He stepped aside to reveal a young woman standing behind him. This is Clara Wilson, the schoolteacher. She's offered to watch Emma while you speak with Peterson. Clara, a pleasant-faced woman perhaps a few years younger than Cassidy's 23 years, stepped forward with a warm smile. I'd be happy to help, Mrs. Matthews. I have experience with babies from helping my sister with her children. Relief flooded through Cassidy. That's very kind of you. Within minutes, Cassidy had given Clara instructions for Emma's care and was walking toward the town's main street with Preston. She was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the height of him, the quiet strength he exuded, the occasional brush of his arm against hers when the path narrowed. Thank you for arranging this, she said, breaking the companionable silence. Peterson's a good man, Preston replied. Fair. He needs help and you need work. It's a simple equation. Cassidy smiled slightly. Is everything so straightforward with you? Something flickered in his eyes as he glanced down at her. Not everything, he said quietly. Before she could respond, they arrived at the general store. A bell jingled above the door as they entered the establishment, which was packed from floor to ceiling with everything from tools to fabrics to foodstuffs. A balding man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter. Ah, Preston, he said, setting aside the ledger he'd been examining. This must be Mrs. Matthews. Mr. Peterson, Preston nodded. Yes, this is Cassidy Matthews. The merchant came around the counter, extending his hand. Harold Peterson, madam. Preston tells me you have experience with bookkeeping. Yes, sir, Cassidy replied, shaking his hand firmly. I kept the accounts for my father's carpentry business in Boston for 3 years. Peterson's eyebrows rose with interest. Is that so? Well, I could certainly use someone with your skills. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and these ledgers are becoming the bane of my existence. He gestured to the books piled on his desk. Would you mind looking at them now? Just to see if you can make sense of my chicken scratch. Cassidy glanced at Preston, who nodded encouragingly. I'd be happy to, she said. For the next half hour, Cassidy immersed herself in Peterson's accounting books. Though his system was different from what she was accustomed to, the principles were the same. She quickly identified several minor errors and suggested a more efficient method of tracking inventory. Peterson listened attentively, his expression growing increasingly pleased. When she finished her explanation, he turned to Preston with a triumphant smile. She's hired, he declared. Can you start tomorrow, Mrs. Matthews? 3 days a week to begin with? The pay's not much, but it's fair. Cassidy couldn't believe her luck. Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Call me Harold, he insisted. And don't thank me. You're doing me the favor. He glanced between her and Preston. Now, what's this I hear about you taking the Miller place? If the council approves, Preston said. Well, as council president, I can tell you it'll be approved, Peterson replied. The cabin's just sitting there empty. Might as well have someone in it. He looked thoughtfully at Cassidy. We normally charge $10 a month, but considering your situation, how about $5 and you keep the place in good repair? Cassidy swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. That's more than generous. It's settled then, Peterson said, clearly pleased with the arrangement. And Preston mentioned you're a seamstress as well? You might want to talk to my wife about that. She's been complaining about having to send to Helena for any decent dressmaking. By the time they left the store, Cassidy felt almost dizzy with the sudden turn in her fortunes. In the space of 24 hours, she had gone from complete despair to having a home, a job, and the prospect of additional income through sewing. I can't believe how everything is falling into place, she said as they walked back toward the cabin. Why is everyone being so kind to me? Preston was quiet for a moment. This country demands cooperation, he finally said. We help each other because someday we might need help ourselves. It's not kindness so much as survival. But Cassidy wasn't convinced that was the whole story. And what about you, Preston? Is it just survival that made you stop for a woman and baby on a bench? He looked down at her, his blue eyes serious. No, he admitted. That was something else entirely. Before she could ask what he meant, they arrived back at the cabin where Clara was gently rocking Emma by the window. The moment passed, but Cassidy found herself wondering about the cowboy who had so unexpectedly changed her life with a simple act of compassion. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind as Cassidy settled into life in Silver Creek. Working 3 days a week at Peterson's Mercantile gave her a steady, if modest, income. Word of her seamstress skills spread quickly, and soon she had a small but growing clientele of women eager for new dresses or alterations to existing garments. The Miller cabin, which had seemed so sparse at first, was gradually becoming a home. Mrs. Colson had donated curtains and linens, and other town residents, hearing of the young widow's situation, had contributed various household items. Cassidy had planted a small vegetable garden with seeds given to her by Clara Wilson, who had become a fast friend. Preston Reed remained a constant, if somewhat enigmatic, presence in her life. He stopped by the cabin every few days, ostensibly to check on repairs or bring firewood, but Cassidy suspected his visits had more to do with the way his eyes softened when he looked at Emma, now almost 5 months old and becoming more alert and responsive by the day. On a particularly warm June afternoon, Cassidy was sitting on the small porch, mending a shirt for one of the local ranchers, when she saw Preston approaching on horseback. Emma lay on a blanket beside her, batting at a small wooden toy he had carved for her the previous week. "Afternoon," he called, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post she had installed at his suggestion. "Hello, Preston," she replied, setting aside her sewing. "What brings you by today?" He removed his hat as he approached, revealing dark hair that curled slightly with sweat. "I was passing through on my way back from the north pasture," he said, though they both knew the cabin wasn't exactly on the way to the Cross T Ranch. His gaze fell on Emma, and his face transformed with a gentle smile. "How's our little lady today?" The casual use of "our" wasn't lost on Cassidy, but she didn't correct him. There was something warming about the way Preston had taken an interest in Emma, something that filled a gap she hadn't realized was aching until his attention had begun to soothe it. "She's been laughing today," Cassidy said. "Real laughs, not just little coos." "Would you like to hear?" Preston's eyes lit up. "I surely would." Cassidy leaned down and tickled Emma's belly, prompting a delighted gurgle that turned into a full baby laugh. The sound brought an immediate grin to Preston's face. "Well now," he said softly, crouching down beside the blanket. "Isn't that something?" Emma responded to his voice by turning her head toward him, her tiny hands reaching out. Without hesitation, Preston offered his finger, which she grasped with surprising strength. "She remembers you," Cassidy observed. Preston looked up, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "You think so?" "I know so. She doesn't take to strangers easily." They shared a smile that lingered a heartbeat too long to be merely friendly. Cassidy felt a flutter in her chest that both alarmed and excited her. It had only been a few months since James's death, and yet here she was, responding to another man's presence like a schoolgirl. As if sensing her discomfort, Preston cleared his throat and stood. "Actually, I came by for a reason. The town's having its Founders' Day celebration this Saturday. There'll be a picnic, some music, games for the children. I thought you and Emma might like to attend." Cassidy hesitated. She had kept mostly to herself since arriving in Silver Creek, interacting with others primarily through work. The thought of a social gathering was both appealing and intimidating. "I don't know," she said uncertainly. Emma might get fussy with so many people around, and I'd be happy to escort you both. Preston interrupted gently. You shouldn't miss your first Founder's Day in Silver Creek. It's quite the event for a small town. The thought of attending with Preston at her side made the prospect much less daunting. All right, she agreed. We'd be pleased to join you. The smile that spread across his face was worth any potential discomfort the event might bring. Excellent. I'll come by around noon on Saturday, if that suits you. It does. Preston nodded, seemingly satisfied. He crouched once more to gently touch Emma's cheek. You be good for your mama, little one. I'll see you Saturday. As he mounted his horse and rode away, Cassidy found herself watching long after he'd disappeared from view. Something was happening between them, something undefined yet undeniable. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but she couldn't deny the anticipation she felt at the thought of Saturday's celebration. The day of the Founder's Day picnic dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that tempered the June heat. Cassidy spent extra time on her appearance, selecting a blue calico dress she had recently remade from a larger garment given to her by Mrs. Peterson. The color brought out the blue in her eyes, and the style, though modest, flattered her figure, which had nearly returned to its pre-pregnancy shape. She dressed Emma in a white gown with tiny pink ribbons that she had painstakingly sewn late into the previous evening. As she tied a matching ribbon in the baby's fine brown hair, Cassidy found herself wondering what Preston would think of their appearance. The thought made her cheeks warm. This is silly, she murmured to Emma. We're just neighbors. Friends, perhaps. But the flutter in her stomach when she heard hoofbeats approaching suggested otherwise. Preston arrived precisely at noon, looking more polished than usual in a clean shirt, vest, and his least worn pair of jeans. He'd even trimmed his beard, Cassidy noticed, and the sight of him standing on her porch, hat in hand, made her breath catch. You look lovely, he said, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. Both of you. Thank you, Cassidy replied, suddenly shy. You clean up pretty well yourself, Cowboy. A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Mrs. Colson insisted. Said I couldn't escort a lady looking like I'd just come in from the range. The word escort hung between them, fraught with implications neither was ready to address. Instead, Preston cleared his throat and gestured to the wagon he'd brought instead of his usual horse. I thought this would be more comfortable for you and Emma, he explained. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Cassidy deeply. That was very considerate, thank you. The town square was transformed for the celebration, with tables laden with food, bunting hanging from every available surface, and a small group of musicians tuning their instruments on a makeshift stage. Nearly the entire population of Silver Creek and the surrounding ranches had turned out, creating a festive atmosphere that was infectious. As Preston helped Cassidy down from the wagon, Emma secure in her arms, heads turned in their direction. Whispers and smiles followed them as they made their way through the crowd, with many people stopping to greet them and coo over Emma. Looks like you're the center of attention, Preston murmured close to her ear. Cassidy flushed. I think it's you they're interested in, Mrs. Wilson at the dressmaker's shop told me you haven't escorted a lady to a town function in years. Now it was Preston's turn to look uncomfortable. Small towns and their gossip, he muttered, but didn't deny it. They made their way to a table where Clara Wilson waved them over. The young schoolteacher's face lit up at the sight of Emma. Oh, may I hold her? She asked eagerly. I've missed her since our last visit. Cassidy handed Emma over, grateful for the chance to enjoy the celebration without constantly tending to the baby. Clara had become a regular visitor to the cabin and a trusted friend who often watched Emma when Cassidy had work commitments. You two go enjoy yourselves, Clara urged. Emma and I will be fine right here. With a grateful smile, Cassidy allowed Preston to guide her through the festivities. They sampled dishes from the potluck tables, applauded the children's three-legged races, and listened to the local quartet play folk songs and hymns. Throughout it all, Preston remained attentive and considerate, his hand occasionally brushing against hers in a way that seemed both accidental and deliberate. As the afternoon wore on, the musicians struck up a livelier tune, and couples began to form for dancing in the cleared area before the stage. "Would you care to dance?" Preston asked, his voice low and uncertain. Cassidy hesitated. Dancing with Preston would make a statement to the town that she wasn't ready to make, and yet, she wanted to. "I shouldn't," she said reluctantly. "It hasn't been that long since James." Understanding filled Preston's eyes. "Of course, I didn't mean to presume. It's not that I don't want to," she added quickly. "It's just, you don't need to explain," he assured her. "There's no rush, Cassidy. For anything." The simple statement, with all its implication of patience and future possibility, warmed her from within. Before she could respond, however, a commotion near the edge of the square caught their attention. 3 rough-looking men on horseback had ridden into the celebration, their manner aggressive and their appearance disheveled. One, clearly the leader, was shouting demands that couldn't quite be heard over the music and chatter. Preston's posture immediately changed, tension replacing his relaxed demeanor. "Stay here," he instructed, moving toward the disturbance. Ignoring his directive, Cassidy followed, concern overriding caution. As they drew closer, she could make out what the leader was saying. "Taxes due, and we're here to collect." The man's voice was slurred with alcohol, his unshaven face twisted in a sneer. "Sheriff Jenkins appointed us his deputies for tax collection, so pay up." The town's actual deputy, a young man named Michael Barnes, stepped forward. "That's not true, Barton. Sheriff Jenkins did no such thing, and you know it. He's in Helena for the territorial meeting." The man called Barton spat on the ground. "Well, ain't that convenient? With the cat away, seems like it's time for us mice to play." His hand hovered near the pistol at his hip. "Now, I said we're collecting taxes, and that's what we're gonna do." Preston moved forward, positioning himself between the troublemakers and the gathered townspeople. "You need to leave, Barton. This is a peaceful gathering." Barton's bloodshot eyes narrowed as he recognized Preston. "Well, if it ain't the high and mighty Preston Reed. Still think you're better than the rest of us?" "I think you're drunk and looking for trouble," Preston replied evenly. "And I think you should ride out of here before you find more than you bargained for." The threat was implicit but clear. Other men from the town had begun to gather around Preston, presenting a united front against the intruders. Barton surveyed the scene, seeming to realize that he was outnumbered. "This ain't over, Reed," he snarled, wheeling his horse around. "You've made an enemy today." "Wouldn't be the first time," Preston replied coldly. With a final glare, Barton and his companions rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in their wake. Gradually, the celebration resumed, though with a more subdued atmosphere. Cassidy approached Preston, who was still watching the direction the men had taken. "Who was that?" she asked. "Wade Barton," Preston replied grimly. "Troublemaker. Used to work for the Cross T until I fired him for stealing. He's been a thorn in the town side ever since. He seemed to have a particular grudge against you." Preston's jaw tightened. Men like Barton always need someone to blame for their failings. "I'm just a convenient target." Cassidy sensed there was more to the story, but Preston's closed expression discouraged further questions. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Thank you for standing up to him." His expression softened as he looked down at her. "I would never let anything threaten this town, or the people I care about." The implication hung between them, clear yet unspoken. Before Cassidy could respond, Emma's cries reached them from across the square. "I should go to her," Cassidy said, reluctantly breaking the moment. Preston nodded. "Of course." As they walked back to where Clara was attempting to soothe an increasingly fussy Emma, Cassidy was acutely aware of the man beside her, his strength, his protectiveness, and the growing feelings she could no longer deny were taking root in her heart. The Founders' Day celebration marked a turning point in Cassidy and Preston's relationship. Though neither spoke openly of their feelings, a tacit understanding had developed between them. Preston's visits to the cabin became more frequent, often bringing small gifts: a rocking horse he had carved for Emma, fresh game from his hunting trips, or wildflowers gathered from the prairie. July brought scorching heat to Montana territory, making Cassidy's small garden a daily challenge to maintain. One particularly sweltering evening, she was struggling to haul water from the well when Preston appeared, as if summoned by her need. "Let me help with that," he said, taking the heavy bucket from her hands. "Thank you," she replied gratefully, wiping sweat from her brow. "This heat is relentless." Preston nodded, efficiently watering the rows of vegetables while Cassidy returned to the porch where Emma lay on a blanket in the shade. "It's the worst July in recent memory," he agreed. "The creek's running low, and the cattle are suffering." Concern furrowed Cassidy's brow. "Is the ranch in trouble?" "We'll manage," he said, though his expression remained grave. "But some of the smaller spreads might not make it if we don't get rain soon." He finished watering and joined her on the porch, his tall frame folding onto the step beside her. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the sun sink toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and red. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Preston said finally, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Cassidy's heart quickened. "Yes, the harvest dance is coming up next month. I know it might still be too soon after your husband, but I thought perhaps you might consider attending with me." The invitation was delivered with such careful respect for her feelings that Cassidy felt a surge of affection for this man who had become so important to her life. James had been gone for over 3 months now, and while she still honored his memory, her heart was healing and opening to new possibilities. "I'd like that," she said softly. The smile that spread across Preston's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You would?" "Yes," she confirmed, returning his smile. "Emma and I would be honored to accompany you." "Emma too, of course," he agreed, reaching out to gently stroke the baby's cheek. Emma responded with a gurgle and a toothless grin that made them both laugh. As the laughter faded, Preston's expression grew serious. "Cassidy, I want you to know that I respect your loss. I don't expect anything. I just enjoy spending time with you and Emma." "I enjoy it too," she admitted. "More than I probably should." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Cassidy thought he might lean in closer. Instead, he stood abruptly, breaking the tension. "I should get back to the ranch. Mrs. Coulson will be holding supper." "Of course," she said, hiding her disappointment. "Thank you for your help with the garden." Preston nodded, putting on his hat. "I'll stop by tomorrow to fix that loose board on your step." He hesitated, then added, "Unless you'd rather I didn't come so often." "No," Cassidy said quickly. "I mean, yes, please come. Emma looks forward to your visits." It wasn't just Emma, of course, but she couldn't bring herself to say the words aloud. A knowing smile touched his lips. "Just Emma." Color rose in Cassidy's cheeks. "You know very well it's not just Emma," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. Preston's eyes darkened with an emotion that made her breath catch. "Good," he said simply, "because it's not just Emma I come to see." With that, he tipped his hat and strode to his horse, leaving Cassidy with a fluttering heart and the realization that she was falling in love with the cowboy who had rescued her on that desperate day just 2 months ago. The following weeks brought no relief from the heat, but they did bring a deepening of the connection between Cassidy and Preston. Their conversations grew longer, their shared glances more meaningful, and their occasional touches, a hand on an arm, fingers brushing while passing an object, more deliberate. Emma thrived under the attention of not just her mother, but also the growing circle of friends they had made in Silver Creek. She was now sitting up on her own and babbling constantly, her personality emerging as curious and determined. Preston took particular delight in her development, often bringing new toys he had crafted or interesting objects for her to examine. One evening in early August, Preston arrived at the cabin with excitement evident in his usually composed demeanor. "I have news," he announced as soon as Cassidy opened the door. "Good news, I hope?" she asked, ushering him inside where Emma was playing on a quilt spread across the floor. "The best," he confirmed, crouching to let Emma grasp his fingers in greeting before looking up at Cassidy. "The town council met today. We've decided to build a proper schoolhouse before winter." Cassidy's eyes widened. "That is wonderful news. Clara will be thrilled." "There's more," Preston continued, rising to his feet. "We need someone to sew curtains, cushions for the benches, and other furnishings. The council would like to offer you the commission." "Me?" Cassidy was stunned. "But surely Mrs. Peterson or one of the other established ladies in town." "It was Harold Peterson himself who suggested you," Preston interrupted. "Your work has impressed everyone who's seen it. This would be a significant contract, Cassidy. Enough to see you and Emma comfortably through the winter." The financial security such a project would provide was immediately apparent to Cassidy. Though she had been managing with her bookkeeping and sewing work, winter in Montana was a harsh prospect that had been causing her increasing anxiety. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Say yes," Preston urged, his eyes warm with pleasure at being the bearer of such news. "Yes," she agreed, a wide smile spreading across her face. "Of course, yes." Without thinking, she threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug. Preston froze for a moment in surprise before his arms came around her, holding her close. The embrace lasted only seconds, but when they pulled apart, something had shifted between them. "I'm sorry," Cassidy said, flustered. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Preston interrupted gently. "Never apologize for that." Their eyes met, and Cassidy saw in his gaze the same longing she felt in her own heart. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, Emma chose that moment to loudly demand attention, breaking the spell. Preston stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should go. I promised Mrs. Coulson I'd fix her chicken coop before dark." "Preston," Cassidy said as he reached the door, "thank you, not just for this opportunity, but for everything you've done for us since we arrived." He turned, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me, Cassidy. Having you and Emma here has changed things for the better, for all of us." After he left, Cassidy lifted Emma into her arms and twirled her around the cabin. "Did you hear that, sweet girl? We have a big project, and your friend Preston thinks we've changed things for the better." Emma babbled happily in response, unaware of the significance of the moment but content in her mother's joy. Later that night, as Cassidy sat by the fire mending one of Emma's gowns, she allowed herself to really consider her feelings for Preston Reed. The attraction was undeniable, as was the deep respect and gratitude she felt toward him. But was it love? And if it was, what did that mean for her memories of James? James had been her first love, the father of her child. His death had left a void that could never truly be filled. And yet, Preston wasn't trying to fill that void, he was creating his own space in her heart, distinct but equally meaningful. The harvest dance was just 2 weeks away. Perhaps there, Away from the daily routine and responsibilities, they might finally acknowledge what was growing between them. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. With a sigh, Cassidy set aside her sewing and prepared for bed. Whatever the future held, she was no longer facing it alone, and that, she realized, was a gift beyond measure. The day of the harvest dance arrived with unexpected drama. A sudden thunderstorm in the morning, the first substantial rainfall in weeks, had turned the roads to mud and threatened to dampen spirits. But by afternoon, the clouds had cleared, leaving behind freshly washed skies and a welcome respite from the summer heat. Cassidy spent extra time preparing, bathing Emma first and dressing her in a new gown she had made from scraps of fine lawn donated by Mrs. Peterson. For herself, she chose her best dress, a deep green calico with ivory lace trim that she had altered to fit her form more flatteringly. She pinned her hair up in a style more elaborate than her usual practical knot, allowing a few curls to frame her face. When Preston knocked on her door at precisely 6 o'clock, Cassidy felt an uncharacteristic flutter of nerves. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to find him standing on her porch looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. He wore a crisp white shirt with a black string tie, a fitted black vest, and dark trousers. His hair was neatly combed, and his beard freshly trimmed. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, mutual appreciation evident in their expressions. "You look beautiful," Preston finally said, his voice slightly rough. "Thank you," Cassidy replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "You're quite handsome yourself." A smile corked the corner of his mouth. "Mrs. Coulson's influence again. She seems determined to civilize me." Cassidy laughed, the sound breaking the tension. "Well, she's doing an admirable job." Emma, hearing Preston's voice, crawled rapidly toward the door, babbling excitedly. Preston's face lit up at the sight of her, and he crouched down to her level. "Well, look at you, Miss Emma. Aren't you the prettiest little lady at the dance?" he said, holding out his arms. Without hesitation, Emma pulled herself up using his knee for support and toppled into his embrace, earning a delighted laugh from Preston. He stood, settling her comfortably against his chest with the ease of someone who had done so many times before. The sight of them together, Emma's small hand patting Preston's cheek, his large hand supporting her, gently created a lump in Cassidy's throat. It was a picture of what might be, of a future she hadn't dared to imagine until recently. "Shall we go?" Preston asked, offering his free arm to Cassidy. She nodded, taking his arm and closing the door behind them. They made their way to the town hall, which had been transformed for the occasion with harvest decorations. Sheaves of wheat, pumpkins, and colorful autumn leaves adorned every surface, while lanterns cast a warm, inviting glow over the proceedings. As they entered, heads turned and conversations paused momentarily. Cassidy felt the weight of curious eyes upon them and instinctively drew closer to Preston. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "Let them," he replied, a hint of defiance in his tone. "I'm proud to be escorting the two most beautiful ladies in Montana territory." His words bolstered her confidence, and Cassidy lifted her chin as they moved further into the hall. Clara Wilson approached immediately, arms outstretched for Emma. "May I steal this little one for a while?" she asked. "Mrs. Coulson and I have organized a nursery area for the babies and young children, with plenty of supervision." Cassidy hesitated, but Preston nodded encouragingly. "It might be nice to enjoy the dance without having to worry about Emma for a little while," he suggested. "All right," Cassidy agreed, kissing Emma's cheek before allowing Clara to take her. "But please come find me if she gets upset." "Of course," Clara promised, already making silly faces at Emma, who giggled in response. With Emma settled, Preston guided Cassidy toward the refreshment table, his hand warm at the small of her back. They were immediately engaged in conversation by various townspeople, all seeming genuinely pleased to see them together. Cassidy was struck by how completely she had been accepted into this community in just a few short months. The local musicians began to play, and couples moved to the center of the hall to dance. Preston turned to Cassidy, a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, echoing his invitation from the Founders' Day celebration. This time, Cassidy didn't hesitate. "I'd love to." Preston led her to the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her hand with the other. As they began to move to the music, Cassidy was surprised by how naturally they fell into rhythm together. "You're a good dancer," she remarked. A smile touched his lips. "Don't sound so surprised. I wasn't born in a barn, you know." "I didn't mean," she began, embarrassed. "I'm teasing you," he interrupted gently. "My mother insisted all her sons learn to dance properly. Said no woman would have us otherwise." Cassidy relaxed, returning his smile. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Preston agreed, a hint of sadness crossing his features. "She passed away 5 years ago. Influenza." "I'm sorry," Cassidy said softly. "Do you have other family?" Preston nodded. 2 younger brothers, both married with families of their own back in Ohio. He hesitated, then added, "What about you? You mentioned your parents were gone, but are there others?" "No," Cassidy replied. "I was an only child. After my parents died, it was just James and me. And then Emma." She fell silent for a moment, then continued, "James was a good man. He wanted so much for us, for Emma. That's why we came west for the opportunity." Preston's hand tightened slightly on hers. "He would be proud of how you've managed," he said quietly. "Creating a life for yourself and Emma under difficult circumstances takes courage." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "Thank you for saying that." They danced in comfortable silence for a few moments, the music weaving around them as they moved together across the floor. When the song ended, Preston didn't immediately release her. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" he asked. "It's getting warm in here." Cassidy nodded, and Preston led her through the side door onto a small porch that overlooked the town square. The night was clear, stars blanketing the vast Montana sky in a display that still took Cassidy's breath away after months in the territory. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. "Yes," Preston agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found he wasn't looking at the stars but at her. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Preston took a step closer, his hand reaching up to gently touch her cheek. "Cassidy," he said, his voice low and intense, "I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words." Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "For what?" she whispered. "To tell you that I've fallen in love with you," he said simply. "With both of you, you and Emma. I know it hasn't been that long since your husband, and I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know." Tears pricked at Cassidy's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. "Preston, Before she could continue, the door burst open, and Deputy Barnes appeared, his expression urgent. "Preston, come quick, it's Barton and his gang. They've set fire to the livery stable." Preston's face transformed instantly from tender vulnerability to determined focus. "Stay here," he ordered Cassidy, already moving toward the deputy. "Find Clara and Emma and stay inside the hall." Without waiting for her response, he followed Barnes at a run, leaving Cassidy standing alone on the porch, his declaration of love still hanging in the air between them. Inside the hall, chaos had erupted as news of the fire spread. Cassidy pushed through the crowd, frantically searching for Clara and Emma. She found them in the makeshift nursery area, Clara already gathering the children to move them further from potential danger. "What's happening?" Clara asked, her face pale with worry. "Wade Barton has set fire to the livery," Cassidy explained, taking Emma into her arms. "Preston and Deputy Barnes have gone to help." Clara's eyes widened. "Those poor horses. And right next to Peterson's store if the fire spreads." Cassidy hadn't considered that. The livery stable was indeed adjacent to several wooden buildings, including the mercantile where she worked. If the fire weren't contained quickly, half the town could burn. "We need to get the children somewhere safe," she decided. "Can we take them to the church? It's stone, and far enough from the livery." Clara nodded. "Good thinking. I'll gather the other mothers." Within minutes, they had organized an exodus of women and children to the small stone church at the edge of town. From its steps, Cassidy could see the orange glow of flames and the silhouettes of men forming a bucket brigade from the town pump to the burning stable. Her eyes searched the scene, looking for Preston among the figures battling the blaze. The sound of gunshots suddenly rang out, causing screams among the gathered women. Cassidy clutched Emma tighter, fear gripping her heart. "Those weren't from the fire," one of the women said grimly. "That's gunfire. Barton must have ambushed the men fighting the fire," another suggested. Cassidy felt sick with worry. Preston was out there, possibly facing not just flames but bullets as well. She handed Emma to Clara. "Watch her for me," she said firmly. "I need to see what's happening." "Cassidy, no," Clara protested. "It's too dangerous." But Cassidy was already hurrying down the church steps, her heart pounding with fear not for herself, but for the man who had just confessed his love for her, a confession she hadn't had the chance to return. As she neared the town center, the scene became clearer. The livery was fully engulfed, but the bucket brigade seemed to be succeeding in preventing the fire from spreading to neighboring buildings. Near the edge of the effort, however, a different kind of battle was taking place. Preston, Deputy Barnes, and several other men were engaged in a standoff with Barton and his gang, who had taken position behind overturned wagons. Occasional shots were exchanged, but it appeared to be a stalemate. Cassidy stayed in the shadows, watching in horror as one of Barton's men attempted to circle behind Preston's position. Without thinking, she called out a warning. "Preston! Behind you!" Her voice carried clearly in the night air. Preston spun just in time to avoid a shot from the flanking attacker, returning fire and forcing the man to retreat. But now Barton had seen Cassidy. "Well, look who it is," he called mockingly. "Reed's pretty little widow. Come to watch your new man die, have you?" Preston's face contorted with anger. "Leave her out of this, Barton. This is between you and me." Barton laughed, an ugly sound that chilled Cassidy's blood. "Everything's between you and me, Reed, including her now." Before anyone could react, Barton raised his rifle and fired in Cassidy's direction. The bullet splintered the wood of the building beside her, sending fragments flying. She felt a sharp sting as one caught her cheek, but adrenaline prevented her from feeling much pain. Preston's roar of rage echoed through the night as he broke cover, firing rapidly at Barton's position. The other men followed his lead, and suddenly the standoff erupted into an all-out gun battle. Cassidy pressed herself against the building, heart racing as bullets whizzed past. She should run, she knew, but her legs seemed frozen in place. All she could see was Preston, exposed and vulnerable in his fury over the shot that had come so close to her. The exchange lasted only minutes but felt like hours. When it ended, 2 of Barton's men lay wounded, and Barton himself was pinned down, his ammunition apparently exhausted. Deputy Barnes and the other men closed in, weapons trained on the cornered troublemakers. "It's over, Barton," Barnes called. "Throw out your weapons and come out with your hands up." For a moment it seemed Barton might refuse. Then, cursing viciously, He tossed his empty rifle into the open and emerged with his hands raised. His remaining gang members followed suit. As Barnes and the others secured the prisoners, Preston rushed to Cassidy's side, his face ashen with concern. "You're hurt," he said, gently touching the cut on her cheek where the wood splinter had struck her. "It's nothing," she assured him, suddenly overwhelmed by relief that he was unharmed. "Preston, I was so afraid." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "What were you thinking coming out here? You could have been killed. I had to know you were safe," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you before I could tell you." Preston pulled back slightly, looking down at her with a question in his eyes. "Tell me what?" Cassidy reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "That I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have almost from the beginning." The tension drained from Preston's body, replaced by a joy so profound it transformed his features. Without another word, he lowered his head and kissed her, a gentle meeting of lips that quickly deepened with all the emotion they had held in check for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I thought I'd lost you before I ever really had you," he admitted. "You have me," Cassidy assured him. "You have us, Emma and me." A shout from the livery reminded them that the fire still burned, though it was now largely under control. Preston sighed, reluctantly releasing her. "I need to help finish putting out that fire," he said. "Go back to Emma. I'll come find you as soon as it's over." Cassidy nodded, but before she could turn away, Preston caught her hand. "Cassidy," he said, his expression suddenly serious. "When I first saw you on that bench outside the general store, holding Emma, something inside me just knew. I looked at you too and thought, that's a family if you'll have me." He swallowed hard. "I still think that, every day." Tears filled Cassidy's eyes at the echo of the words he had spoken to her on that first desperate night, words she hadn't fully understood at the time. "We'll have you, Preston Reed," she promised, "with all our hearts." With one last touch of his hand to her cheek, Preston turned to rejoin the firefighting efforts. Cassidy watched him go, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had rescued her in every way a person could be rescued, not just from immediate danger, but from loneliness, from despair, from a future without hope. As she made her way back to the church to retrieve Emma, Cassidy reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment. James's death had seemed like the end of everything, but instead, it had been the beginning of something she could never have imagined: a new life, a new love, a new family forming from the ashes of loss. By dawn, the fire was fully extinguished. The livery stable was a total loss, but thanks to the quick action of the townspeople, no other buildings had been damaged. Barton and his gang were locked in the town jail awaiting the return of Sheriff Jenkins, who would escort them to Helena for trial on charges of arson, attempted murder, and numerous other crimes. Cassidy had taken Emma home hours earlier, putting the exhausted baby to bed before waiting anxiously for Preston's return. When he finally appeared at her door, he was covered in soot, his clothes reeking of smoke, but his eyes were clear and determined. Without a word, he took her in his arms again, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, he looked down at her with a certainty that took her breath away. "Marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife. Let me be Emma's father in every way that matters." Cassidy's heart soared. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Preston's face split into a grin of pure joy. "I don't have a ring yet." "I don't need a ring," she interrupted. "I just need you." He kissed her again, more gently this time. "You have me, Cassidy Matthews, for as long as we both shall live." From Emma's room came a soft cry, as if the baby sensed the momentous decision that had just been made about her future. Preston's eyes lit up at the sound. "May I?" he asked. Cassidy nodded, and together they went to Emma's cradle. The baby looked up at them with curious eyes, her little hands reaching upward. Without hesitation, Preston lifted her into his arms, cradling her with natural ease. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Guess what? We're going to be a real family now." Emma cooed in response, her tiny fingers grasping at Preston's shirt as if in approval. Cassidy watched them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what James would have wanted for them. She realized not endless mourning, but a life filled with love and security. In Preston, Emma would have a father who adored her, and Cassidy would have a partner who respected her strength even as he offered his own. "When?" she asked, suddenly impatient to begin their life together. Preston looked up from Emma's face, his expression thoughtful. "How about the first day of autumn? It's only 3 weeks away. Time enough for preparations, but not so long that we have to wait." "Perfect," Cassidy agreed, stepping closer to embrace both him and Emma, her family. Unexpected and precious beyond measure. 3 weeks later, on a crisp September day with leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson, Cassidy Matthews became Cassidy Reed in a simple ceremony at the Silver Creek Church. Emma, dressed in a gown made from Cassidy's wedding dress, was passed among the attendees, who cooed and admired the baby who had, in many ways, brought this new family together. As Preston slipped a simple gold band onto Cassidy's finger, his eyes held a promise that transcended the formal vows they had just exchanged. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered townspeople spoke volumes about how thoroughly Cassidy and Emma had been embraced by this community. The celebration afterward was joyful but brief, as Preston was eager to show Cassidy and Emma their new home, not the cabin where she had begun her life in Silver Creek, but the main house at the Cross T Ranch, where Mrs. Colson had already prepared a nursery for Emma adjacent to the master bedroom. As they drove the wagon toward their new life, Emma sleeping peacefully between them, Preston took Cassidy's hand in his. "I was thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "that Emma might like a brother or sister someday. Not right away," he added hastily, "but when you're ready." Cassidy smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'd like that," she agreed. "A house full of children. A home full of love. It's more than I dared hope for when I arrived here." Preston brought her hand to his lips, kissing it tenderly. "It's what I've always wanted," he confessed. "A true partner, children, a legacy built on something meaningful. When I saw you sitting there with Emma in your arms that day, something told me you were the answer to a prayer I hadn't even known I was making." As the wagon crested the hill, the Cross T Ranch came into view, the solid main house with smoke curling from its chimney, the well-maintained barns and corrals, the grazing cattle dotting the vast pastures that stretched toward the distant mountains. It was a kingdom of sorts, built through hard work and determination, and now it would be the foundation for their future together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," Preston said softly as he drew the wagon to a halt before the house. "Home?" Cassidy repeated, the word filled with all the promise and security she had sought since leaving Boston. In that moment, as the Montana sun bathed them in golden light, Cassidy realized that sometimes the end of one journey is merely the beginning of another one filled with even greater joy and deeper love than could have been imagined. From the ashes of her grief had risen a phoenix of new life, new hope, and a family forged not just by blood but by choice and commitment. As Preston helped her down from the wagon, Emma stirring in her arms, Cassidy knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged beside this man who had seen in her and her daughter not brokenness or burden, but the family he had always desired. And as they crossed the threshold together into their new home, Preston's arms strong around her waist and Emma secure between them, Cassidy silently thanked the twist of fate that had brought her to that bench outside the general store on a desperate evening months ago, the evening when a kind-hearted cowboy had looked at a woman with a baby in her arms and seen a future bright with possibility. Years later, as their family grew to include 2 sons and another daughter, Preston and Cassidy would often tell the story of how they met, of how love had found them when they least expected it, bringing healing and hope in equal measure. And always, the telling would end the same way, with Preston's eyes still holding that same wonder as he looked at his wife and said, "I knew it from the first moment I saw you. That's a family if you'll have me." And Cassidy would always reply, her heart as full as it had been on that autumn day when they wed, "The best decision I ever made was saying yes."